Yeah, there are injuries, so we have to update these rankings. Now, tier one, not really going to change. Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, gonna stay the same. And I would take these players both ahead of Brees and Bijan in your redraft league, just because the floor ceiling combo is absolutely nuts. You look at CeeDee Lamb, he's going into his age 25 season, and he's coming off a year where he averaged over 100 receiving yards per game. Then you consider the fact that, well, Dallas still projects out to be a very good offense this next season, and there is nobody in Dallas that's going to compete for Lamb with targets. You have Jake Ferguson, an okay tight end. Will probably be good in fantasy because of this offense. You have Brandon Cooks, one of my favorite wide receivers of all time, who last year showed that he's probably cooked if you look at the advanced analytics. So CeeDee Lamb should come out, one of the best offenses in the league, stepping into his prime, demand a massive, massive target share. So I'm pretty safely putting him wide receiver one. Now, Tyreek Hill, of course, last year was a better wide receiver in fantasy, where Tyreek did average 112 receiving yards per game. I'm just going to give the slight edge to CeeDee Lamb because Tyreek is going into his age 30 season. And if you look at the range of outcomes for wide receivers that had a similar age 29 season to Tyreek at age 30, a few of these guys did drop off, like Andre Johnson, Reggie Wayne, Terrell Owens. All these players got worse going into their next year, but obviously not trying to knock Tyreek at all, just explaining why we would have Lamb at one. Now, dropping down to our next tier, this is going to be a tier where you can kind of do whatever you want. Jamar Chase, I think, is going to be in a phenomenal offense, has the big playability that Amon-Ra St. Brown may not. Now, I don't know if you should be taking Chase over St. Brown if you are playing in a full PPR format. The reason being is if you look at Amon-Ra St. Brown, he has the profile where you are just going to get flooded with targets underneath, and that is a very safe floor that you're going to get in a full PPR league. I just think if you're playing in a half PPR format, non-PPR league, there you probably prefer the big play potential for Chase. But regardless, if you look at Sportsbook's projections at the moment, both these offenses should be phenomenal. Sportsbooks are projecting Detroit to be the second best offense in the league, and then Cincinnati to be a borderline top 5 offense. A lot does hinge on the Jamar Chase wrist injury. And then we're going to go Justin Jefferson with the last slot here. Now, if you're playing in a non-PPR format or a best ball league, I do think Jefferson has more big play potential than Amon-Ra St. Brown. But in your regular redraft format, we're not caring as much about those potential spike weeks. So in your regular redraft league, I think we're going to go St. Brown over Jefferson, just because if you look at sportsbooks and the projections that they have for these offenses this next year, they are projecting Minnesota to score about, on average, 21.5 points per game, where you have Detroit projected to score about 25.5. And then obviously St. Brown doesn't really have much target competition outside of the tight end in his offense. Now, dropping down to our next tier, A.J. Brown, Puka Nacua were wide receivers that I had flipped previously this offseason. I mean, looking at Puka, he's coming off the best rookie wide receiver season of all time. Now, did I see it coming? No. Am I an idiot? Yes. I'll be the first person to admit it. But then you go through and you look at the historical data and say, okay, well, Puka at 22 years old, he historically comps to CeeDee Lamb, Marquise Colston, Brandon Marshall, Alshon Jeffrey, Michael Thomas, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Anquan Bolden, David Boston. And if you look at the range of outcomes that you have for these wide receivers at age 23, about the median expectation is you are averaging 16 to 17 points per contest. Should be a decent offense with Los Angeles. Right now, sportsbooks are projecting them to score almost 24 points per game. To be honest with you, the reason I moved A.J. Brown ahead of Puka Nacua is once we begin to see like player props from sites, and then once we saw the underdog pick'ems, you did see the projections that these odds makers are putting out there where they are putting A.J. Brown significantly ahead of Puka Nacua. And y'all know, I definitely value their opinion. And when these players are in the same tier, I am going to let that sway my mind just a bit. Like if you go ahead and if you look at where Puka's at this next season with projections, he's at 6.5 receiving touchdowns, higher, lower, 1,150 receiving yards, higher, lower. Whereas if you look at where A.J. Brown is, A.J. Brown's actually at 1,300 receiving yards, higher, lower. So I'm going to be honest with you, that's really the only reason I moved A.J. Brown over Puka. I think both are extremely safe options. These are guys I'd be looking at the 1-2 turn in our regular redraft leagues. Now, dropping down to our next tier, this is going to be a massive, massive, massive tier. And y'all know I've been streaming drafts every single night. And every single night when we're in the middle of round 2, when we're at the beginning of round 2, I look straight in the camera, tell you the God's honest truth of I don't know who to take here. They are all about the same. We'll throw Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Marvin Harrison, Chris Olave, Nico Collins, Jalen Waddle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Devontae Adams. We'll throw them all in here. Let's talk about Garrett Wilson, Drake London at the very top. Garrett Wilson actually goes round 1 of underdog drafts every single time. In your regular redraft league, I would not take him round 1. In your regular redraft league, I'm for sure instead going to go with like Jahmyr Gibbs over Garrett Wilson. But that's besides the point. If you're looking at Wilson, London, these are both wide receivers that are coming off years where they were like the wide receiver. I mean, I can pull this up. Garrett Wilson averaged 9.5 fantasy points per game. Drake London averaged 8.5 fantasy points per game. They were not even top 36 wide receivers from a points per game perspective. And now you have to draft them as top 10 options if you want them. It feels crazy, but that's what happens when you get the quarterback upgrade from Zach Wilson to Aaron Rodgers. That's what happens when you get the quarterback upgrade from Desmond Ridder to Kirk Cousins. If you look at offensive projections right now, the Falcons, the Jets, they do project out to be above average offenses, which is a complete 180 from where we saw them in the past. If you look at the target shares that these wide receivers have had at an incredibly young age through their NFL careers, they have proven the ability to just dominate targets in their respective offenses. So right now, everybody in their mom in fantasy is projecting these guys to get 10 times better. Should you take them at the 1-2 turn? Probably not. I wouldn't be super excited about it. But like I said, all these guys kind of are in the same tier. Now, going over to Marvin Harrison Jr., this was an interesting case. So by the time you're watching this, I will have put out the consensus ADP list on flockfantasy.com. And I'm actually going to send this to everybody who signed up to Underdog with code FLOCK in 2024. Every week going out, I'm going to update all these numbers. But I was very interested to see where Harrison was going to go in redraft leagues, because where I've been drafting on Underdog all offseason, Marvin Harrison Jr. kind of goes round 1. If he's not going round 1, he is at the very, very top of round 2, which is the most expensive we have ever seen a rookie wide receiver in fantasy. And I've done that research dating all the way back to 2014. I mean, the next closest guy was like Amari Cooper in round 3 his rookie year. But I was interested to see where Harrison was going to be going in your regular redraft leagues. Harrison at the moment on ESPN is currently going at the 2-3 turn. And if you look at Yahoo, he's going in the middle of the second round. I would feel very comfortable drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. at the end of the second round, the beginning of the third round, given how strong of a prospect he is. And given the fact, I mean, I wrote about this in the draft guide, but typically when you see wide receivers that are this good of prospects, they are not going to a team with a competent quarterback. Because if a wide receiver is as strong of a prospect as Marvin Harrison Jr. is, typically that team has a top 3, a top 4, a top 5 NFL draft pick. And how do you get a top 5 NFL draft pick? You have horrible quarterback play. So it's a very unique situation where that's not the case, because Kyler Murray was just injured last year. Kyler, I want to say, is not horrible. I don't know how good he is, but it's not like you're going to have Daniel Jones here. So I feel very comfortable drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. at the 2-3 turn in your redraft league. In underdog drafts where he goes to the 1-2 turn, I personally haven't really been drafting him this offseason, but I think it's just because it's such an aggressive point for any rookie. And of course, if you wanted to draft Marvin Harrison Jr. at the 1-2 turn in underdog best ball drafts, I'm going to keep drafting them every single night until the season gets here. I mean, they're best ball, so there's no time commitment at all during the season. It's how I draft hundreds of teams every year. It's how I won $150,000 on Underdog 2 years ago. And super exciting announcements. We had the Flock tournament on Underdog Fantasy get kicked off this last Thursday. Had so much success that Underdog agreed every Monday and Thursday until the season starts, we are going to have a Flock draft party Monday, Thursday nights. We're going to be dropping Flock tournaments for y'all to join. Couldn't be more excited. Like I said, I'm going to be streaming every single night, drafting on the live stream. If you wanted to get in with us, you can find that link in the description, in the comment section. If you use code FLOCK, you are going to get my 2024 Fantasy Football Draft Guide, my 2024 Fantasy Football Rankings, my 2024 Fantasy Football Consensus ADP cheat sheet that should allow you to dominate your draft. And that's all going to be emailed to you every single week with updates when we have these injuries, etc. Just got to use code FLOCK. And also, I forgot, because of the success that we've had and the extensive partnership we just signed with Underdog, they're hooking everybody up who used code FLOCK. Doesn't matter if it was 2 years ago, last year, today, tomorrow, next week, you're going to get a Christian McCaffrey special pick'em, more than less than half a total rushing yard for week 1. Couldn't be more excited. Thank you, Underdog Fantasy, for hooking up everybody with that. But anyway, let's move on down. We have Chris Olave, Nico Collins here. Olave is very difficult because I want to say he's just as talented, about as good as Garrett Wilson. The issue with Chris Olave is Garrett Wilson's going from Zach Wilson to Aaron Rodgers. Chris Olave is going from Derek Carr to Derek Carr. Gross. It's hard to project him to have that massive bounce back because the offense should be so bad. Nico Collins at 12 is a wide receiver that I'm not going to lie, I was idiotic to put him behind Stephon Diggs at the beginning of this offseason. Before we had done all the research for the draft guide, before we dove into the advanced analytics of Nico Collins' season last year, I thought maybe it was due to the situation and that Nico just had elite quarterback play, not a lot of target competition, why he was so good this past season. And then you dive into Nico Collins at 3.3 yards per route run, one of the highest marks that we've seen from any wide receiver, like not named Tyreek Hill, in the past 5 years. Incredible. You're attached to one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Now, of course, we can't rank Nico Collins as a top 5 option because Stephon Diggs is coming over. You have Tank Dell. You have target competition in Houston. But with the historical data we showed previously this offseason, we know that we want to be drafting wide receivers that are in good offenses. And that's exactly what Nico Collins is. Jalen Waddle at 13. We know we want to be drafting wide receivers that are in very good offenses. What's actually funny is if you look at Jalen Waddle, you saw the fall this past year from 13 points per game down to 11.5. And yeah, it disappointed a lot of fantasy drafters. But if you look under the hood and you look at the advanced analytics, I mean, Jalen Waddle was pretty much just as solid as he had ever been. He was at 5.1 receptions per game in comparison to 4.4 the year prior. And his yards per route run actually went higher. It was a career high at 2.9. So what Waddle dealt with last year was just negative touchdown regression overall. I believe Jalen Waddle, you can actually see positive touchdown regression this next year, and an offense that currently sportsbooks have scoring a top 5 finish in total points this year. So I'm completely fine putting Waddle here. Now, the offense that's supposed to currently be scoring the most points in 2024, according to sportsbooks, are the Niners with Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. Now, it seems like everybody and their mom has flipped the page and said that Brandon Ayuk is the better fantasy option than Deebo Samuel. I don't know if that's true. While I would agree that I think Ayuk's the better NFL talent, based off how they use Deebo Samuel, I think we've seen a higher floor and a higher ceiling combo from Deebo as long as he can stay healthy. I mean, even this past season for a quote-unquote down year for Deebo and a massive year for Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel is still at 14 points per game in comparison to Brandon Ayuk at 13 points per game. Now, of course, I'm recording this before we have any Ayuk news. Right now, I mean, there is a storm of brewing on Twitter that Brandon Ayuk may get traded. Brandon Ayuk may be extended. I do not know at this time. What I do know is as soon as that news breaks, I will go ahead. I'll head over to flockfantasy.com. I'll update these rankings. Deebo Samuel may be flying to the top of this tier if Ayuk gets dealt. And Ayuk may be falling down dramatically if Ayuk gets shipped over to Carolina. I'll update it on the site. And also, like I said, if you use code FLOCK and made that $10 deposit on a new Underdog account in 2024, every Sunday, you are going to get emailed our updated rankings and our updated draft guide. So I'll make sure you get the update if Ayuk is dealt. But let's go over and look at the last wide receiver in this tier, Davante Adams. Now, Davante Adams is a wide receiver that has been one of the best fantasy options that I have seen, I mean, really for the past 10 seasons, consistently year in and year out. I mean, I want to say the only other guy that had a peak as high and as long as Davante Adams was Antonio Brown. But with that being said, Davante Adams is now going into his age 32 season. He has declined for 3 seasons in a row. Sportsbooks currently have the Raiders as the 6th worst offense in the NFL this season. So I love Davante Adams. If he got traded to a different situation, he would be ranked significantly higher. But personally, it's not my style to draft a 32-year-old wide receiver that's declined for 3 straight seasons going into what should be a horrendous offense this next year. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we're going to look at Mike Evans. I mean, talk about consistency. If we are looking at Evans, the Bucs are supposed to be a pretty bad offense. You would assume that Evans is going to begin to decline at age 31. But Mike Evans this past year, 2.4 yards per route run, the highest mark we've seen over the past 3 seasons. 14.3 points per game, the highest mark we've seen over the past 3 seasons. Now, I'm not going to act like age isn't a factor here with Mike Evans. If Mike Evans had this profile and he was 25 years old, I would probably have Mike Evans ranked up closer to wide receiver 8, wide receiver 9. I'm definitely going to need to discount because the man is going to be 31, but still looks like he's not slowing down a bit. Now, Devonta Smith at 18. So hard to figure out what you were going to have in Philly. No Jason Kelce, Barkley added in. You had the complete disaster, train wreck, fall off, whatever you want to call it for Jalen Hurts down the stretch last year. A lot of people, including myself, are speculating Jalen Hurts was hurt, and a fully healthy Jalen Hurts will get back to the numbers that he had in 2022. And in that season, Devonta Smith averaged over 12 points per game, Smith is one of the ascending premier talents of the wide receiver position in the NFL. He's stepping into his prime. He's only going to be 26 years old this next year. I think a lot of it hinges on what does the passing volume look like in Philly, though, because we already know the roles are very defined for A.J. Brown and Smith in this offense. Now, Stefon Diggs will be the last wide receiver in this tier. With Diggs, I understand, yes, you had the offensive coordinator change at Buffalo last year, and in the second half of the season, Stefon Diggs looked like one of the worst wide receivers in the NFL from an efficiency perspective. Now, with that being said, and I know we're making excuses, but Stefon Diggs, over the past 3 years, every single season, has averaged over 100 total air yards per game. Stefon Diggs, over the past 3 years, has averaged about 14.5 fantasy points per contest. And Stefon Diggs, for the past 3 years, has averaged at least 2 yards per route run every single season. This is supposed to be a good offense at Houston this year. And while I understand Tank Dell, while I understand Nico Collins looked phenomenal last season, and I'm giving Nico Collins his flowers, look how high I have him in these rankings, there is a world, and I'm not saying this is the case, but it is a possibility. There's a world where we look back 6 months from now and go, oh, do y'all remember when we thought Nico Collins and Tank Dell were really good just because of small sample when there was nobody else there with one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL? And then we saw Stefon Diggs, a guy that had been an alpha wide receiver for the past almost decade, come over, and we saw who Nico Collins, Tank Dell really were. You are operating with a very limited sample with Dell and Nico Collins. You have a very large sample of dominance for Diggs. He fell off for the final 8 games with the change in offense. But I don't know. I'm still going to be giving the benefit of Stefon Diggs because of how good this offense is. And I've drafted a decent amount of him, honestly, as a wide receiver 2 or 3 on Underdog. Now, going over to our next tier, we're going to go Cooper Kupp at 20. Kupp, if he can get back to where he was in 2022, where he was in 2021, he will be the best value on this list by far and away. But to be fair, Puka stepped in. Puka put up the best rookie wide receiver season of all time. Cooper Kupp's going into his age 31 year. He has declined from a points per game perspective every season over the past 3. He's dealt with ankle injuries. He's dealt with hamstring injuries. So unlike Mike Evans, where Mike Evans, same age, Mike Evans is getting better in fantasy. Cooper Kupp is getting dramatically worse. Inertia is one tough thing to deal with. Once a player starts going downhill, it's hard to flip that switch. There is a possibility, though, that we look back 6 months from now and go, oh, remember when you got the discount on Cooper Kupp just because of a few injuries? So obviously Cooper Kupp has a high ceiling. DK Metcalf, wide receiver 20. I know that there's going to be a portion of the people watching this screaming, oh my gosh, DK Metcalf, wide receiver 21, you're an idiot. He should be way higher. The change in offensive coordinator is going to mean this is a much better passing offense, blah, blah, blah. DK Metcalf was drafted in 2019. He's played 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, and now we're going into his 6th season. DK Metcalf has 1 year in his NFL career where he's finished higher than the wide receiver 20 from a points per game perspective. I think a lot of people see DK Metcalf, they see that he is built like I am, and they go, oh my gosh, that guy has all the upside in the world. He can potentially be the wide receiver 1 overall. But if you just look at the production that he's actually given you over the past 5 years, it hasn't been that case. A lot of people are expecting Jackson Smith-Njigba to get better this season and take more targets. Now, of course, he may just take those from Tyler Lockett. I know a lot of people are expecting that you are actually going to get an improvement in the Seattle offense because of the change in coaching staff, particularly the passing game. But I'm not going to price him as if that's a guarantee. Now, DJ Moore is our next guy at 22. What's funny is DJ Moore was a lot better than this last year, and DJ Moore just got a massive quarterback upgrade. The issue is you also got Rome Odunze, you also got Keenan Allen coming over. So what's going to happen with DJ Moore is the efficiency, in my mind, is going to go up dramatically. Like if you look at his yards per target, if you look at his yards per reception, I wouldn't be surprised if those go up significantly for DJ Moore. But the issue is going to be that his target share in this offense is going to come down. There's no way DJ Moore sees 30% of the Chicago Bears targets when you have actual quality wide receivers rounding out a wide receiver trio. Now, of course, you're going to look at the Houston guys and go, well, Mason, you have Nico Collins ranked so highly. Mason, you have Stefon Diggs ranked. I like Caleb Williams, but as a rookie quarterback, we're not going to expect him to put up the same type of numbers that CJ Stroud should this next season. Now, Malik Nabers has all the hype in the world. Malik Nabers has looked so damn good in training camp. Every other clip you watch is Malik Nabers coming out, making a highlight grab, just blowing past defensive backs. But looking at sportsbooks, they are currently projecting out the Giants to be a bottom 5 offense in the NFL. We've seen the historical data that if you're in a bottom 5 offense in the NFL, you're going to have a very difficult time producing. Daniel Jones has never allowed his wide receivers or a tight end. Daniel Jones has never allowed anybody to do anything in fantasy. So I'm not saying that he has no shot to do anything, but I am going to be hesitant. Already ranking Malik Nabers a wide receiver 23 is extremely aggressive for a rookie wide receiver. Now, he's a phenomenal prospect coming out of LSU. I mean, he played alongside Brian Thomas Jr., someone we'll talk about later, another wide receiver that went in round 1. And the man had almost 1,600 receiving yards his true junior season in 13 games. So Nabers is phenomenal. But the issue is where we were talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. saying, oh, typically really good wide receiver prospects get stuck with horrible quarterbacks and very bad offenses because they get selected at the top of the draft. It's kind of what you're dealing with Nabers. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we're going to have 2 guys back-to-back in Zay Flowers, Tank Dell. These are 2 wide receivers that follow a very simple rule of thumb that if you followed it over the past, I want to say 10 years now, you have printed money in fantasy. A good rule is draft wide receivers going into their second years that were good rookies. Zay Flowers, good rookie season. Tank Dell, phenomenal rookie season. Now, I want to give Tank Dell his flowers here because I previously was sitting here going 24-year-old rookie wide receiver that is absolutely tiny. I think a lot of this has to do with CJ Stroud. I don't know if Tank Dell's that good. But then I pull this up for our draft guide. Tank Dell averaged 101 intended air yards last season. Tank Dell, a tiny receiver operating deep downfield. It's credible. Great quarterback. I am sure when we're ranking Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, all this highly, yes, one of these guys is not going to pan out. I understand that. But because of the amount of production that's going to be in this offense, I think you're probably going to have one of these guys hitting in a big time way. And I definitely don't want to be fading the Houston receivers. Now, Michael Pittman will be our next guy, wide receiver 26. Now, I actually drafted a lot of Michael Pittman last year, so don't scream at me for this. Michael Pittman Jr. will be in a situation, now you have added target competition in the form of Josh Downs going into year 2, in the form of A.D. Mitchell being added in this offense. You have Jelani Woods as well, a viable tight end. You have Jonathan Taylor fully healthy. They may run the ball. And then I know Anthony Richardson right now is being priced, and he probably should be priced as an elite level fantasy quarterback, even though we've only seen him for an extremely small sample, because Anthony Richardson is going to do one thing. He is going to get in football games and run the ball. That is great for Anthony Richardson in fantasy. And it's probably going to be great for the Indianapolis Colts as well. And for the Indianapolis Colts, I think Anthony Richardson is going to be a dramatic upgrade over Gardner Minshew last year. But just because the Colts are going to be a lot better, because Anthony Richardson can rush the ball, because he can boost the efficiency of Jonathan Taylor, who's going to be running the ball as well, it doesn't inherently mean there's going to be more passing volume to go around. So I think you will see actually fewer passing yards, passing touchdowns in Indy this season. I think you will see more receivers taking targets away from Michael Pittman Jr. So I don't know if I love the situation. Like, I almost want to have T. Higgins ranked ahead of him. So if I go over and I look at our consensus ADP, like I said, this is live on flockfantasy.com right now. And I will also make sure we're getting to this to y'all in the email updates every single week. But nonetheless, T. Higgins on Underdog has an ADP of 42. On Yahoo, T. Higgins goes round 6. On ESPN, T. Higgins goes round 7. This would be a wide receiver in a redraft format that is the perfect example of a mid-round value. And the reason why you should potentially in your redraft league go with the running back early, go get an elite tight end, go get an elite quarterback. Because if you're going to be able to afford T. Higgins in round 6, round 7, it is such a smash pick for a wide receiver that when we saw him healthy with Joe Burrow, this was someone that went out there and he posted low-end wide receiver 1 seasons, high-end wide receiver 2 years. If you look at sportsbooks at the moment, they are projecting the Bengals to almost average 25 points per game. They are projecting the Bengals to be one of the best offenses in the NFL, aka they're expecting Joe Burrow to be healthy. It's no Tyler Boyd. I know Burton's there. I know Yoshi's. I know there's some speculation that the wide receiver 3 here is going to be good. Reality, they're probably not as good as Tyler Boyd was a few years back. They're probably not taking as many targets. And I think you're going to have so many targets funneled to Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. I think it's a great buy low opportunity on Higgins this season. George Pickens will be our next guy, wide receiver 28. I kind of want to move George Pickens behind Amari Cooper. Because if we just follow our rules, kind of avoiding players in bad offenses, trying to draft guys in good offenses, George Pickens is supposed to be in a much worse offense than Amari this next season. Right now, you actually have Pickens and the Steelers projecting to score 21 points per game, whereas you have the Browns projected to score about 22.5 points per contest. And one concern that I have between these two guys as well is if Ayuk gets dealt, he's not going to Cleveland, but he may go to Pittsburgh. So I think that this will be a spot that we potentially look to move these. What's funny is Amari's actually gotten better every year over the past 3 from a points per game perspective. But if you look at his splits with and without Deshaun Watson, Amari over the past 2 seasons has actually been better in fantasy when Deshaun Watson has not played. Now, our next guy is going to be Jayden Reed. Now, Jayden Reed follows a very simple rule of thumb. You want to draft wide receivers that are in good offenses, and you want to draft wide receivers going into year 2 that had strong rookie seasons. That is Jayden Reed. Now, of course, the issue is in Green Bay, you have Dontavian Wicks, you have Romeo Doubs, you have Christian Watson, you have Tucker Kraft, you have Luke Musgrave, you have Josh Jacobs. There are so many players that are going to be touching the ball here that it could look like a vintage Patrick Mahomes, Kansas City Chiefs situation where, I mean, we've seen over the past decade outside of Tyreek Hill, pretty much no Chiefs receivers have been viable. And that's because so many players are touching the ball from a week-to-week perspective. That's kind of the concern that you're going to have in Green Bay. Now, Calvin Ridley will be our next guy at 31. Now, Calvin Ridley should be in a bad offense right now. If you look at sportsbooks, they are projecting out the Titans to be a bottom 5 offense in the NFL this season. But this coaching staff has come out and they've said, yeah, we want to air it out. The ground and pound days of the Tennessee Titans, that's done. There's a new regime in town. We're going to let Levis be a gunslinger this season. And DeAndre Hopkins dealing with this knee injury. They're saying he'll be back by weeks 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't know at the moment. What I do know is DeAndre Hopkins going into year 12, dealing with the knee injury, going into the start of the season with the new coaching staff, doesn't seem great for Hopkins at the moment, which should make you excited about Ridley. Our next guy is going to be Chris Godwin. The hope that you have with Chris Godwin is that he comes in and he sees more targets out of the slot. Change with the offensive coordinator here. So if all of a sudden Godwin gets more slot usage again, he can be appealing. But if you go over and if you look at what you had with Chris Godwin over the past 3 seasons, he has gotten worse every year from a points per game perspective. He's only 28. It's not like he's guaranteed to continue to decline, but it is worth pointing out. Now, our next guy is going to be Keenan Allen. What's really funny is Keenan Allen is going into his age 32 season, and he's gotten better every year over the past 3. And full transparency, obviously Keenan Allen won leagues last year, and I didn't really draft any Keenan Allen. I was looking at this situation going, Mike Williams is going to take targets, so Quentin Johnson's going to take targets, Keenan Allen's going to be 31, blah, 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 blah. And then what happens? Quentin Johnson turns out to be one of the biggest busts we've seen over the past 5 years. Mike Williams gets injured immediately, and Keenan Allen gets funneled 8.3 receptions per game. But with Keenan, like I said, now he's another year older, going to his age 32 season. He's going to see a quarterback downgrade from Justin Herbert to Caleb Williams, and is going to see significant target competition, where last year he was competing with targets with Joshua Palmer and Quentin Johnston. This year he's going to be competing with DJ Moore and Rome Odunze. Now, Terry McLaurin's going to be our next wide receiver at 34. Full transparency, Terry McLaurin is going to go much earlier than this. If you use these rankings, you're probably not going to get him. Terry McLaurin goes pick 50 in Underdog drafts. He goes pick 81.5 in Yahoo, and he goes pick 92.5 on ESPN. I don't have a sleeper ADP loaded into this chart yet. I will get that sleeper ADP in the consensus ADP chart for y'all. But besides the point, my thing with Terry McLaurin is his best finish ever from a points per game perspective was wide receiver 20. He is going into his age 29 season. And while Jaden Daniels should be a significant improvement for the Washington Commanders over Sam Howell, the passing volume in this offense should go down. If you look at current projections for Jaden Daniels and his passing volume this next year, to just go ahead and pull up what we have on Underdog Fantasy, Jaden Daniels, they have a higher, lower 19.5 passing touchdowns. Jaden Daniels, higher, lower 3,100 passing yards. Is this to say that Jaden Daniels is a bad pick? No, Jaden Daniels is going to be a phenomenal fantasy option because he is going to run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. Jaden Daniels may be a good NFL quarterback, but it's not college anymore. He doesn't have Malik Nabers. He doesn't have Brian Thomas. You're not just going to be able to go through and put up gaudy passing stats. And if you think I'm completely wrong about this, go over to Underdog Fantasy, link in the description comment section. Go look at the 3,150 passing yards and feel free to take the higher. I'm not doing it because I understand that Jaden Daniels probably going to be a very low volume passer in his first season. And instead probably going to be running the ball a lot and playing it a little more safe. Now going over to our next guy, Christian Kirk. With Christian Kirk, I know this is another player. If you follow these rankings, you're not drafting him. I think he has a very high floor. I think that this Jacksonville Jaguars offense is actually going to improve. The thing with Kirk is, where is the upside? The best year we've ever had in fantasy from Christian Kirk, he averaged 11.8 fantasy points per game. Well, yeah, Ridley's out. Zay Jones is out. There are a lot of vacated targets. Brian Thomas Jr. is coming in. Gabe Davis coming in. You still have Evan Ingram. You have ETN. So I just realistically don't know what the upside is with Christian Kirk. Like if I rank Christian Kirk wide receiver 35 and he comes out this season and he's the wide receiver 25, cool. I'm an idiot. Did it really make an impact? No, it didn't. In your regular redraft format, drafting someone and getting a 3-bump finish on where you took him at wide receiver doesn't really make a difference. I would rather swing on these guys that I think have higher ceilings, such as like Gene Reed. But anyway, let's move over. Going over to the Chiefs players. I'm going to update this. At the time of this recording, I have Xavier Worthy, 36, Hollywood Brown, 37, Rashee Rice, 38. But it seems like every day we get closer to the start of the season, the less and less likely is it that we get a Rashee Rice suspension. It feels like we have heard nothing about Rice and potential suspensions this next season. If Rashee Rice was going to be playing a full 17 games, I would have Rashee Rice ranked ahead of Hollywood, Worthy, of course. I would have him ranked ahead of Kirk, Terry, Keenan, Godwin, Ridley, Reed, Amari, Pickens, Higgins, Pittman. I would probably have him alongside like DJ Moore, Malik Nabers. I think Rashee Rice would be right there as a top 24 guy. Hollywood, I know we're a lot lower on than most. The thing is, if you go ahead and if you look at Hollywood Brown, he has gotten worse every year over the past 3. And this past season, he averaged 1.3 yards per route run. That is ungodly bad. Now, of course, it's a significantly better situation. Significantly better with Patrick Mahomes. Nobody's going to deny that. But I think he's washed. The NFL thinks he's washed. Instead of him getting the $72 million contract that Calvin Ridley got, the man gets about, 10% of that. Literally, Calvin Ridley got 10 times the size of a contract. Now, some shout outs. If you are going to look for the later rounds in your drafts, definitely take the high upside guys. Go like Brian Thomas. Go Christian Watson. Go Rome Odunze. Take these guys that could have very high finishes. The thing that you want to avoid in the late rounds in these drafts, don't be the guy taking Courtland Sutton in your regular redraft league. If you're drafting on Underdog and you draft Courtland Sutton wide receiver 48 and Courtland Sutton turns out to be the wide receiver 30 and he gives you some spike weeks on Underdog, that can be a great pick and that can really help you win. But in your regular redraft league where you have access to the waiver wire, we're going to be churning. Really with the late rounds, I'm going to prefer going with running backs like Chase Brown. That way we can just take guys, go J.K. Dobbins, that maybe if their role's not there at the beginning of the season, cool, we'll cut them. I'll go pick up someone exciting off the waiver wire. But you don't want someone like Sutton that's just going to be clogging your roster where there'll always be a wide receiver off the waiver wire that you can pick up that has a similar projection in a shallow redraft format, that is. But I think that's all I got for you. Really appreciate you. Of course, like I said, I'm going to be updating these every single week on flogfantasy.com. if you use code FLOCK on Underdog Fantasy for a 2024 account with a $10 deposit, you, like I said, will get my 2024 draft guide, 2024 rankings, 2024 ADP draft sheet. And I'm going to be updating that and sending it out to you with an email every Sunday, including all the injury updates and including all the trades that we potentially get, suspensions. Hopefully we have some more news relatively soon. But yeah, you should get the next update on this Sunday and next Sunday, whatever Sunday you're watching this. Oh, yeah. And also Monday and Thursday, make sure you are drafting with us on the Flock tournaments on Underdog Fantasy. Like I said, you can find that link in the description comment section. Code FLOCK. We get hooked up with all that stuff. And also, Flock Fantasy Meetup, August 22nd. Links in the description if you want to come. Should be a ton of fun. I'm going to be there. A ton of fantasy football YouTubers are going to be there. So if you're in Texas, you better be in Austin, Texas, August 22nd to hang out with us, talk some fantasy football, and get some live drafts going. But appreciate you. Really hope you have a great one, and hope we get to see you out with a live stream sometime soon.